The Opel Monza A was a large executive fastback coupe built by Opel from approximately 1978 to 1986. It was introduced as a luxury coupe based on the Senator and the Record, produced in West Germany, and also sold in the UK as the Vauxhall Royale Coupe, which was the coupe variant of the Royale, which was the Senator. And it existed in two main generations, the A1, produced from 1978 to 1982, and the A2, also called the facelift, from 1982 to 1986. The A1 was made between 1978 to 1982 and was a classic fastback coupe with big hatchback trunk and a generous glass area for a bright cabin. You also had simple chrome bumpers, a clean, substantial presence, reminiscent of the Commodore but a bit sportier, and it basically was a Senator, but just a hatchback. The first version of the Monza, the A1, was built almost unchanged until 1981. Then, from May 1981, as with the Senator at the time, the renewed A1 was delivered with more aerodynamic exterior mirrors, a modified dashboard, and new fabric upholstery, but still with bumpers made of chrome-plated steel. The Monza also received the 2.5-liter fuel-injected engine from the Commodore C, which developed 136 horsepower and replaced the 2.8 S. The 3-liter S remained in the range until July 1982, until the revision of November 1982, of which only 6-cylinder engines were installed. The A2 was available, as said before, from late 1982 for the 1983 model year until 1986, and it featured a smoother front end, large headlights, but a lower drag coefficient. The chrome bumpers were replaced by matte black or body-colored plastic, and you also had clear front indicators, just a modernized appearance overall, and as said before, a more dynamic and aerodynamic, seen as the drag coefficient dropped from 0.40 to 0.35. And from March 1983, Opel offered both the Monza and the Senator with new 4-cylinder engines, such as the 2-liter E, 2.2i. The dashboard, the instrument themselves, and the depth of the radio bay were also revised. Overall, the interior features had been significantly upgraded in contrary to the A1. And as said before, the Monza wasn't a unique car on its own because it shared many interior components with the Record and the Senator, yielding a mix of cloth, upholstery, luxury, and practical plastics, which made the car functional yet comfortable. And the seats offered good support as the rear seats folded down to expand the trunk cargo space. Eventually, the improvements caused by the A2 were more luxurious trims, for example, and standard electronically adjustable side mirrors and an onboard computer showing consumption, speed, and range of the car, making it very futuristic for its time. Built on the V platform, the Monza shared underpinnings with the Senator A as said before and used advanced suspension components. Early models struggled with some gearbox issues, which Opel eventually addressed by switching to Getrag 4 and 5-speed manuals. And also the 3-speed automatic that was available since the beginning later became a 4-speed automatic, depending on the model and version you had. In contrary to the Opel Senator, the Monza was only powered by petrol engines and not having the turbo or supercharged diesel options. Besides this, the engines were pretty much the same as in the Senator, only for the A1 starting with the 2.8S instead of the 2.5S the Senator A started with. The 2.8S was available between 1978 to 1981, and basically the specifications of the engines pretty much were the same, although the Monza overall was a bit faster and had a lower fuel consumption, as this engine, just like the Senator A, had 138 horsepower and 214 Nm of torque, giving the car a 0 to 100 time of 10 to 11.5 seconds, eventually also giving the car a top speed of 190 to 195 kilometers an hour. The fuel consumption actually was a bit lower than in the Senator because of the Monza's weight being a bit lower, as this was between 11 and 11.9 liters. As said before, the top-of-the-line carbureted engine remained to be the 3-liter S, available between 1978 and 1982, and basically the engines for each car, the Senator and the Monza, were all available in the same years. The 3-liter S in the Monza was available in the same period as the 3-liter S was for the Senator A. And this engine, the 3-liter S, had 148 horsepower, 233 Nm, and gave the car a better 0 to 100 time of 9.5 seconds to 11 seconds for the 3-speed automatic. The top speed was 193 km an hour for the 3-speed automatic and 198 km an hour for the manual, and the fuel consumption was actually quite comparable to the 2.8S because the engine only was a bit bigger, as this was between 11.6 to 12.4 liters. And this engine eventually was succeeded by the 3-liter E, although the 3-liter E already was in production of the Monza and the Senator since 1978 and was available up until 1986. This engine had 178 horsepower, 248 Nm, giving the car a very good 0 to 100 time of only 8.5 seconds to 10 seconds for the automatic. Some sources even say that the pre-facelift did this in 8 seconds. The top speed therefore was also higher, between 210 to 215 km an hour, and the fuel consumption, because it was a fuel injected engine, was actually very decent, between 11 to 12.4 liters. Later, Opel introduced also more fuel injected engines, as in 1981 the 2.5e was introduced, and this was available up until 1984 and had 134 horsepower and 185 Nm of torque, giving the car actually quite comparable specs to the 2.8S, as the 0 to 100 time was 11 to 12.5 seconds, and also the top speed was comparable with 190 to 195 km an hour. But the difference was made in the fuel consumption, as the fuel consumption was lower, between 10.7 to 11.7 liters. And this engine eventually, as said before, got discontinued in 1984 because in that year it was succeeded by the 2.5i. With the facelift you also had 4-cylinder engines being introduced, as said before, as in 1982 Opel introduced a 4-cylinder 2.0e for both the Senator and the Monza, and this had between 109 to 113 horsepower and between 160 to 162 Nm of torque. In the Senator this actually was way slower, as with an automatic transmission this did 0 to 100 in 16.5 seconds, although in the Monza, because of its lower weight, it did this between 12.1 to 15.5 seconds, and also the top speed was higher at 180 to 185 km an hour. This engine actually was very fuel efficient for the car, as the average fuel consumption was between 8.9 to 9.7 liters. And this engine also eventually got succeeded because it was available up until 1984. And this engine was succeeded in 1984 by the 2.2i, also taken out of the record, just like this engine was. And the 2.2i was available between 1984 to 1986, up until the end of the Monza. And this had a bit more power, 113 horsepower, although the horsepowers actually were the same. It had a lot of torque more, as the torque was 182 Nm instead of the 160 to 162 for the 2-liter E. Therefore also the 0 to 100 time was improved from 11 to 12.5 seconds, much better than the 15.5 for the automatic transmission in the 2-liter E. But in my opinion, the top speed wasn't improved that much, from 183 to 188 km an hour. Yet this engine was more fuel efficient than the 2-liter E, with 8.7 to 8.9 liters per 100 kilometers, which in my opinion is actually very good, as the Monza was a very big car at that point. As said before, the 2.5e eventually also got succeeded by the 2.5i, and the 2.5i was introduced in 1984. Basically the same story as the 2.2i, as it was just the last engine to be made up until 1986. This engine had 138 horsepower, 205 Nm of torque, giving the car a 0 to 100 time of 10.5 to 11.5 seconds, and also giving the car a very good top speed of 194 to 201 km an hour, also having a decent fuel consumption of 10 to 10.4 liters per 100 kilometers. And besides the 3-liter E, the top of the line engine was the 3-liter I, basically having a catalytic converter and also being available between 1985 to 1986. Because this engine had a catalytic converter, the power output was much lower than with the 3-liter E, which did not have a catalytic converter, as this engine had 154 horsepower, 226 Nm of torque, giving the car a actually slower 0 to 100 time of 9.5 to 10.5 seconds, and a lower top speed of 192 to 260 km an hour. Fuel consumption therefore was also higher at 11 liters per 100 kilometers. With the Opel Monza you had a special version made by Opel themselves, but also many versions made by tuners, as the special version made by Opel themselves was the GSE, and this was basically a very sporty high-spec model from mid-1983 to the end 1986, and this basically bundled all sporty upgrades such as Recaro seats, LCD instruments such as a digital dashboard, a firmer suspension, a limited slip differential of 40%, and also just some GSE styling, as different wheels were there, and also you had some striping in the GSE. The GSE was only exclusively available with the 3-liter 6-cylinder engine, producing 179 horsepower, and therefore it wasn't available with any other engine. It was just the top of the line. And unlike the comparable Senator CD, the GSE did not offer heated seats with the Recaro seats. It also featured a sportier suspension than the CD, and as said before, its own striping. But besides the GSE, you also had the Irmscher Monza, and basically this was a full performance and style upgrade, as it was basically also just a body kit with a front spoiler, side skirts, a lowered suspension, and also a sport exhaust, also having either the 3-liter E tuned to 190 to 195 horsepower, which also was a slight input increase, but you also had the Irmscher 3.6E, which was specially built, and this basically was the 3-liter enlarged to a 3.6 liter, having an output of 215 to 225 horsepower, with the torque being around 280 Newton meters. This actually gave the car a 0 to 100 time of 7.8 seconds and a top speed of 230 km an hour. You eventually also had the Mantzel Monza, also just a specialization of a high compression engine tuning, taking the same 3-liter E, but having a output of 210 to 230 horsepower and cranking the torque up to 270 Newton meters depending on the build. And performance wise this was also very fast, as the performance 0 to 100 times stats were between 7.5 to 8 seconds with a top speed of 225 km an hour or higher. But basically one of the most notorious Monzas were the Bitter SC, which was a coach-built luxury coupe based on the Monza or Senator chassis. And basically you had the choice of the 3-liter E tuned a bit to around 190 horsepower, but later also a 3.9 liter straight 6 with 210 horsepower. And basically this car had some premium features such as hand-built interiors, an exotic bodywork and unique identity, although only 144 units were made. By the time the production ended in 1986, the Opel Monza's total production reached approximately 43,812 units, of which around 29,414 were made of the A1, marking the total production at around 1/3 of the total production of the comparable Senator A. And the Monza was actually aimed at the executive coupe segment, going head-to-head with the Mercedes-Benz C-Class coupes, such as the C123 and the C124, with, for example, the GSE being comparable to the 280e. But you also had the BMW 6 Series E24, although that car actually had engines that were much higher output rated. But you also had a also comparable Ford Capri or other upscale fastbacks of the era. Predecessor and successor wise, the Monza was a bit complicated, as the predecessor was the Opel Commodore B Coupé, and in my opinion also the Commodore C two-door somewhat, because the Commodore B was a generation before the Commodore C, and therefore it was somewhat a gap in my opinion. And successor-wise, the Monza actually never got a direct coupe replacement. Its sporty luxury essence later appeared indirectly in models like the Lotus Carlton or the Lotus Omega, and in my opinion a comparable successor would be an executive model of the later Opel Calibra, such as the 2.5 V6 with 170 horsepower, or the 2-liter turbo with 4x4. Thank you for watching this video. In order to be able to upload more videos in the future, please consider becoming a member of my channel or sending a super thanks on this video. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe for more, and don't forget to check out this playlist with many interesting videos covering various parts of the automotive industry, and I will see you in the next video.